I try to get, yeah,
That's better.
okay. I don't know, like, all right. So it's been a few
It
weeks, been a
has.
month. I was gone on a trip. And then I think the last thing we recorded was for Refine. And then we just got busy with clinic stuff and life stuff. I think our intention today is just to get on here and do a little bit of a update on what's happening, and we'll just see where the conversation goes. But we did remember to brew ourselves tea this time. What tea did you choose, James? Does never jar?
I, I don't remember.
I remember
I'm,
you just picked it out. Like,
it's tasty. Ah, so, red flower fusion. It's a black tea, oolong tea. It's a black and oolong tea. A little bit of pomegranate flavor, cornflowers, vanilla, touch of caramel, and bergamot.
I think that's one that falls. We went back and forth on whether or not it fits into our Earl Grey collection. I think we decided on no, but it's our Earl Grey lovers enjoy that one.
We've got what's 369 Earl Greys over there now. And then we've got a peach Bellini in the black section has also got bergamot in it. And then this is one. So there's definitely plenty of bergamot on the shelves over there, but didn't feel like a classic Earl Grey. But yeah, it's tasty though. I haven't had this one for a while. I forget how I steeped it a little light too. So about 2.5 minutes instead of the 3, but it's got a nice flavor to it.
That one's been with us was probably part of one of our first expansions. So it's one that
Awesome.
I think gets overlooked on the shelves a little bit because it's been around so long.
I think that's one of the things about having 160 teas on the shelf is even some of our teas that are just phenomenal and we usually sell a ton of, I think have not moved quite as much because people are exploring, and great, people are exploring other teas,
Yeah.
but Inner Courtyard is a fabulous Earl Grey, but it's with all the new ones coming in, it's been feeling a little left out probably because people are not discovering it as easily because there's more options, but it is probably still my favorite Earl Grey.
The inner courtyard.
Yeah. Yeah. We had London Fogs at the coffee shops here the last couple of weeks, which is a nice use of an Earl Grey. And because of the cost of daily London Fogs, we was like, hey, we should take some Earl Grey home. Sarah's intending to use some of the lavender and make a sugar-free, probably with some monk fruit syrup for making London Fogs at home. So looking forward to that. Between Inner Courtyard and Foggy Courtyard, which
Was one of our newer ones.
yeah, she'll get to choose. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I hadn't really had one before, and it's a nice, tasty alternative. So
Genuine question, not trying to prompt our conversation here. Have you done it cold brew yet? I know we've done inner courtyard as a cold brew. Have you tried making a London fog?
not.
Cold-
The plan is she's took home stuff for the syrup last night. We'll probably get that made, and then we'll probably play around over the next week or so. So maybe by the time we record again, we'll have to remember to talk about that. But no, it's been exciting. It's been nice to experiment with some of those things. And obviously we're still coffee drinkers. We like our coffee as well, but it is nice to mix it up a little bit.
I've been doing more tea recently too. I've been trying to get here in the mornings before coaching and doing a little like journaling time or reading time and make myself a pot of tea. So it's been a nice like ritual rhythm and then doing the coffee like after coaching. Because yeah, I do enjoy my coffee. It's been a nice kind of flow. It's funny, we've had conversations. The weather's starting to get warmer, right? And we had a really nice weekend at the tea shop. We got to meet a lot of new people and a lot of people who knew we used to be on Main Street didn't know that we were still around and found their way down here. And so getting to make those connections. But last year, as the weather got warmer, people disappear into the woods and go hiking. And there's I think, less appeal of hot tea. And I know one of the conversations you and I have had is like, well, people drink coffee year round too. And then just getting to talk about some of our cold brews and stuff a little bit more for the people that are trying to get away from hot. But it's tea drinkers are tea drinkers. So it's fun to mix them up.
I wonder if that's about the ritual of it. Because I do feel the tea is, I don't know, feels like a little more reverence around tea when I drink tea. There's usually trying to create a certain mood. There's coffee just gets you going. We've been making protein coffee in the office in the mornings to get our protein levels up. But yeah, the ritual of it, I wonder if it gets lost in the summertime with
Busy.
all the outdoorness. And it's around here, especially, it feels like it's a little manic a little bit around the summertime where it's such a short season. People are like on the run and on the go, trying to get it all
Get it
in.
out before it gets cold again.
Yeah. And live. Yeah. But it's interesting. Did you put the cold brew section on the website? I know we talked about putting a section for
I
the ones that we like really well cold. And it was as you revamp the website
Yeah.
for none of your.
No, I think it would be interesting to maybe just create a cold brew collection. It's tricky because we do almost everything cold, but pointing that out. No, so we have a section that is like new releases and seasonal highlights. And we don't really, I think it's probably safe to say that we don't really have any new releases. We have one that's going to be hitting that's a new cupcake tea with cherry on top, right? So it's like
Cherry on top,
chocolate cherry.
Black Forest based.
Yeah. And so that one will probably end up in that section just because it is a new release. It's not on the shelves yet. So, but everything else in there kind of with the intention of the seasonal highlight nature. And so we dropped some of our ones that we know are really good for cold brews in there. And then mint was another, I guess, category in my brain because as it gets warmer, mint can be very cooling, whether you have it hot or cold, right? So that was a shift that we made to that collection. But it might be interesting to put a piece on there for the cold brew because we could actually explain how people make it and all of those things. So, well, yeah, I think that's a cool idea.
Yep. Have we cold brewed mint condition yet?
Not yet. It's on in fact, I should probably do it before I leave the office today because every 2 or 3 days, I'm like, man, I should cold brew mint condition. And then I get busy and I get in here the next day and I'm like, man, I should cold brew mint condition. That's one that we need to do.
It was surprisingly delicious hot. So it's a watermelon
Yeah.
tea, watermelon and mint. Surprisingly delicious hot. And I will be very excited if it tastes as good cold as it does hot. Just because of it's a cool idea for summer.
No, and we had somebody, it's interesting we're talking about the cold brews. We had somebody reach out recently on Instagram that she is wanting to do, I don't even know if I've shared this with you. Yes. That is wanting to do a nature hike and incorporate tea into their hike and but with that holding space for different herbs and plants that can be found in nature and then the crossover of tea. So obviously very aware that like our mint doesn't grow here in the hills of Montana for the tea, but is wanting to have like a pit stop into the hike and wanting to know basically sun tea or so the conversation back and forth is like our experience with not hot brewing tea is through the cold brew, and it usually sits for 12 hours. One of the things that I told her that I would do is I wanna basically just, like, room temperature for 4 or 5 hours and see how that changes the quality of the cold brew because she's thinking about getting some tea from us and then taking it out and having people put some tea in the bottom of a mason jar, fill it up, go on the hike, and then when they get to the end of their hike, they'll have the tea to drink and get to talk about plants and nature and all of that stuff. We may or may not, don't know yet, have a shorter steeping solution to some of that. I'm hoping it comes out for, 4 or 5 hours, but I told her that we're pretty used to the 12. That's also for convenience of putting it in, waking up in the morning and having it to go. So that'll be interesting too.
Trip. Talk about your trip a little bit.
Hmm. Oh, this is where we're going today.
Let's just start.
What do you want to know? Oh, no, it was great. Oh man, you're gonna make me come there today.
You don't
Not
have
fair.
to.
No. No, I recently went on a trip, so I went out to Santa Cruz, California for it was basically 4 days. I got an opportunity so it was actually a coaching retreat for CrossFit, and it was not intended to be educational or learning experience, but basically an opportunity for us to go out and do some self-care. And so this happened through a coach that I met through a different mentoring program we were doing. And his name's Pat Barber. And so he invited no more than 10 coaches out to his property in Santa Cruz and basically just hang out for 4 days and take care of ourselves. His wife cooked for us. And it was a deep dive. But it was really cool. So there were 5 of us that ended up out there, and I actually ended up being the only female. So that was an interesting energy to be out there doing that type of work with. I knew before we went that this felt like it was gonna be an opportunity to merge our worlds a little bit, even though the Chinese medicine per se didn't have anything to do with why we were out there. It was for CrossFit, but it was pitched as self-development, personal development, and just opportunities to lean in. Yeah, it just sounded really cool and like, why not do it from that space? So we went out there and it was way more personal development and self-development than it was CrossFit. But it was it was really intense experience for me personally, but really pivotal. I'm interested to see where your questions go, but it's been quite a shift, I think. I've been in a I don't even know what word I would use since we've moved to Montana has been a very challenging chapter of life in general on all fronts. And I don't think I realized just how much I was carrying and or how much I was doing my own work. It's like kind of like a combination of both until I got out there and just having 4 days. It was tech free, so we had to turn our phones in as soon as we got there, which was absolutely wonderful. Telling people before, they're like, "How are you?" I'm like, "I'm looking forward to turning my phone off for 4 days." And we camped outside, so we got to sleep outside and help cook meals and a lot of hiking, a lot of journaling, a lot of writing, a lot of big questions and opportunities to, do the work. So that was fun.
I didn't
Yeah.
have any, I didn't have any specific questions. I think topic though,
Yeah.
it's, we talk all the time within our style of the medicine that we practice. It's always been the undertone is there always been an invitation there for us to lean in and do our own work. And the more of that we do, the better practitioners we show up as in the treatment room. And I know that's always been something that resonates with you when you do it. You don't always make time for it. So it's cool. And it's been neat to sort of watch your rhythms as you've gotten back. And what, a week, 2 weeks you've been back now? It feels like it's still there too, which is nice, it feels like it's stuck a little bit, but no, it's good stuff.
Fun.
Yeah.
It's funny because we hold so much space for our patients and our work. And I don't think we don't avoid our work, right? Like we're always doing it at some level, but there is an awareness at certain chapters of our own process where like, how much of this can I do? And how much of it do I want to do? There's definitely a stubbornness within me to just be like, I don't want to deal with this, right? Like, we've got patients with us running the gym, we've got coaching, and we've got all of this stuff. And like, how much of that how much bandwidth do I have to deal with it and process it? And also, do I want to? Because I've got things I got to do today. And that's life. That's the same things that our patients come in with. And we know that. But space is an interesting word to hear you say, because I think that was a huge piece of just feeling, I don't necessarily mean stuck in a bad way, but like just stuck in the day to day rhythms. There's no space to do that. So if you just, I've made a joke at a couple different points in my journeys. Man, I wish I had a pause button so that like life could catch up. And we've never found it, right? Like it doesn't exist. But that's what that felt like for me was let's just press pause, go off grid. But the integration back is the recipe. That's the hard part is okay, now that you have all of those things and you've done this, what are you going to do with it? Because the goal isn't to just need to run off into the woods and hide for 4 days to deal with things. It's like, all right, so how do we make sure we don't end up in that place again? But also, what kind of changes are you trying to make? So it's interesting to be so heavily in my own work in that place that I don't really feel like I've been in probably since acupuncture school. That was a fun chapter too. But and we've done pieces of it and stuff over the years, and we're always growing and leaning into things, but not in that way or that intensely for quite some time. And so it was a nice invitation. I'm glad that I was able to lean into it and take advantage of that and not shy away from it. But it's also a nice refreshing comeback and like, all right, there's drinking more tea, right? I've been trying to make time to journal a little bit every day and read and get back into some study through our Chinese medicine lens. I've tried picking up some books and, oh, these are things that I want for my life, but not any less busy now than I was when I went on the trip 2 weeks ago. But somehow it just feels like there's more space for it than there was. So,
It's about finding a way. Yeah, press pause every day. How do you find a space to do that? Whether it's, and it's not really getting up earlier, going to bed later, or those sorts of things. But the intentionality of it, I think, is important. It helps you keep in that space as well. But
good talk.
good talk. So what else is going on? What else you want to share?
I don't know. Clinic seems to be moving along, right? That's one that's always just felt steady. Feels good. We've had again just some new patients coming in. Things seem to be going well on that front. Still some big heavy topics in the treatment rooms. I had a patient pass away a few weeks ago, so that's an interesting corner of our work that it doesn't happen a lot, but is challenging and tricky in different ways.
End of life work. You think about treating someone's spirit, and when they come in and understanding what part of their journey they're in, like how do we help navigate and facilitate and move folks along in a way that supports them and supports their desires on a lot of levels to feel better, be better, quality of life better. Also with the understanding that knowing that this is probably the trajectory of things and that's okay. And how do we help those transitions? It's been neat work to do
Yeah.
yeah.
You've got your own kind of journey and story with that.
Yeah, for sure. And we're here for it. I think it's the beauty of the way we practice is it's not all physical. And yeah, how do we show up for folks in those moments in a way where all of the emotions and stuff that are coming out for people in those moments. And yeah, it's fascinating work. And I think it's work that really you can only hold space for that was a bold statement. It's only going to hold space for if you're treating on that level. There's stuff you can do for pain and making people comfortable and all sorts of things. But I think treating on a spirit level is completely different approach to that type of work for folks. But yeah, it's been an interesting time in clinic. I had a moment a couple of weeks ago, long day and lots of patients. And as I reflected on the patients, it was neat to recognize how good a place they all were in. And we get busy doing the work and just showing up. And yeah, we know people are getting better. It's expected. But to sit and reflect on how well some of them are doing and how they graduate to different parts of their care. And it just the life stuff that is blooming within the treatment room sometimes is neat to experience. And then it's neat to understand the roles we play in people's lives with some of this work. It's so personal sometimes, personal without being too personal. But, and then we had instances this week where somebody we'd worked with in the past popped back up in a place that she really needed some support. And it was neat to be able to be there, hold that space, give that support. And then later that evening, hearing from the person and realizing how impactful that was. And it's neat to play that role in that situation for that person. And no, it goes beyond what people think some of the work is sometimes, but no, it's neat. The clinic feels like we're doing the work we're supposed to be doing.
Where the newer ones that are coming in feel they're coming in for that work too, which is it's not always the case, right? Like you go through waves of, hey, I just want help with my digestion. And but it's neat to be a lot of them people that are coming in right now are coming in through referrals of other patients or past patients, specifically for the life stuff. Like you need to, they can hold that space for you. It's really cool to hear and to get those referrals because it's the work we really enjoy. It's the work we're really good at, right? That's the yeah. We've done a couple episodes. I think we did one where it was like, what do people come in for? Why acupuncture? And we kind of covered in that one all the physical stuff and the route to the mental emotional work and those types of things. But it's so fascinating to it's really hard to describe what we do. We recently pulled the trigger on another project, which is probably we're probably not gonna go super far down this road, but
Reveal.
but it's interesting to it's hard to put words to what we do. Trying to document what it is that we do and how we do it, and even to sit down and record is so hard because it's just for us, it's just life, right? We show up, we do the work, we get to have some great conversations and all of it. But there's not really, it's not a switch we're flipping on and off for the office or for anything else. And you're like, man, like how do we explain that to people? Like even talking about the end of life work, hospice care through Western lens is supporting people, but it's pain management. It's all of these things that you can put a label on and put words to. And yeah, the goal is less pain and sleeping a little better and all of that. But there's just this element of in between that is it happens and it's real and it's an experience for us and for the patient. But like how do you put words on it, which we're actively trying to do, right? Every time we record as we're writing things down and trying to document stuff. I think it's I just can't help
Sorry,
it.
my battery's dying. This is my
Can't
vision moment.
but no, it's and I think I was telling you the other day, I think we were having coffee on Thursday. And one of the things that we're really wanting to do, that I'm wanting to do, this is a we moment, but also this is a me, is like, how do I step into, I want to do more teaching and we've got ideas for classes and courses and all of those things. And we have the ideas, we've got a plan for getting them built, getting them integrated and getting them out there. But there's this gap of what I know and information wise, right? And then there's what I know for experience and clinical experience and practical. And then have this way that you're going to get it to people. But there's all of this in between of how, right? Like it's such a simple, yeah, it's so interesting to think about how we get to transmit that to people beyond joke was fire is red, right? Beyond like fire element is red because it's true, but it's so much bigger than that. And yeah, I'm rambling now, so I'm gonna stop.
Well, I think the part that gets sticky for us, sticky's again, like, is the reverence we hold so much of it with, and how do we transmit it, but also transmit it with the reverence that it deserves, and it not just be, especially when it comes to our medicine, and it's not just another set of parameters for people to diagnose and stick needles in people. And how do you do it? And we're going to circle back to some of the self work. How do we encourage people to dive into themselves and do the work that they need to do so they can show up in the best way for their patients that may or may not have anything to do with fire being red and holding enough space around it to do it in a way that it's not being done? I think is part of the challenge in that. And also not getting to a place of paralysis by analysis. That's easy too. But yeah, it's not from an arrogance place. It's from a reverence place. It's understanding. It's always interesting to be in a room with folks. I was in a meeting this weekend with a group of people, a group of practitioners on Zoom, and it was interesting to be there and also recognize as lovely as the folks were that are in the room, and as talented as I'm sure they are, and as wonderful as they are in their practice, to recognize the uniqueness sometimes in how we hold certain ideas and the value that has when it comes time to start sharing it with people and teaching and talking and writing and recording and all of the sorts of things from a place of we have something to say, something to share, and all of those sorts of things. And the belief system would also be that if we're intended to share it and we don't share it, are we truly showing up in the world the way we're intended to? So,
A lot of it is, I don't know how far down this road we want to go today. There's a, and not a lot of people know this, right? So depending on how somebody is watching this or how they're connected to us, hopefully, if you're practicing the medicine, there's an understanding of what I'm about to say is true. And there's probably people that disagree, but there's also for the person that's just curious what the heck we're talking about with acupuncture, like our medicine, our field of study and how we practice is dying, right? Um, there's not a lot of people teaching from the classical place anymore. And classic, I don't mean in the like deep roots of translating from Chinese to English and transferring knowledge. There's the five element is fading. A lot of what's taught nowadays is very just prescriptive. A lot of the schools teach TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, which is actually only about 70 years old. I was telling, we had somebody come into the tea shop this weekend and we were chatting about that. And it's funny that that kind of gets dubbed as, oh, they practice traditional Chinese medicine. It's great. They're practicing the more westernized version of the medicine. And it's beautiful. I personally, before getting into this, had a wonderful experience with TCM. And so this isn't a TCM versus five element versus classical. That has nothing to do with it. But there's an element of the roots of the medicine are missing because we're learning and being taught how to fire it out faster. And that's somebody comes in with knee pain. So here's the protocol and here's the points to go do that. And you may pivot one or two things, but this is the prescription for treating knee pain. And what is missing is the interaction and the connection and the relationship between practitioner and patient beyond here, I'm just here to give you different medicine today. And so part of what we're hoping to bring forward and one of our goals to bring forward is bringing that back home to the practitioner doing their own work. And what does that even mean? And what does that have anything to do with how you are treating the patient in front of you? Um, and yeah, there's not a roadmap for it. There's no roadmap for you doing your own work. And guess what? If there's no roadmap for you doing your work and figuring out your life, that means there's no roadmap for your patient either. And that reverence piece, right? Like it's wanting that to come through, but it being more of an invitation to lean in and explore more than it being about here's how you do that or here's how you help. So, and when you're trying to teach something from a place of, hey, I'm going to give you these words, but I also want you to find your own, is like, how do we do that?
but how do we do it from a place that isn't off-putting to people who are already doing things? Well, there's absolutely folks within our profession that I think are doing wonderful things at some of the schools and staying true to messaging and authenticity and those sorts of things. So I don't want any of this conversation to come across like judgy of any of that. And at the end of the day, TCM is TCM, and people have wonderful careers helping people with TCM. There's more to it, and there's more to it than five elements. We aren't solely five element practitioners. Some of the folks we've studied with obviously go beyond where's the five element, and there's a joke in there to be made about Judy's the only person who can teach five element acupuncture, so it's not really five element acupuncture. So there's a level of toss that in there. There's also an aspect of it because it's not whole either. And I don't even think it's about methodology or understanding, or none of what we're trying to get across is about translations and my sauce is better than your sauce. I think one of the valuable things I got mostly out of school, and I know you did too, was the idea that you know, the practitioner matters, not from an ego place or I'm the best practitioner in the world or my hat is bigger than your hat, but more of a place of intentionality and holding space and honoring the process and honoring the patient. And how do we get there in a way? And how do we share our process and how we approach things and what we feel like is most important for us being the practitioners that we are? And how do we share that with people that might be interested in it as an invitation to go deeper and learn more about what has been valuable for some of our patients without getting into um, my hat is bigger than your hat. And it's not, I remember sitting in a lecture with Jeffrey Yuen once, and it was really impressed with the fact that he's very much who he is, and Chinese medicine is who he is. And he was also part of his message was to not come across as telling you that anything you're doing outside of what he has to say is wrong, but also saying that what I understand is authentic and you're welcome to practice the way you want to practice. And if you're helping your patients, wonderful. And what I'm about to share with you is different than what is being out in the world these days. But we're going to pause here because UPS is showing up. So there's going to be a place right here. Unpause. So I think what I really want to make sure comes through in that messaging is that we're not really scoffing at any other way people practice. Like we all find our way. And for those of you that want to scoff at what we just said around all of it, it's not intended that way. It's like, how do we show up for people and understand and practice the way we want to? But yeah, how do we share some of what we understand through our own experiences with the world that are the people that might be interested? And if you're not interested, that's okay too. But
I think the point of, and you just said it, was like, if what you're doing is working, it's working, period. Like I tell patients that all the time when they're trying to figure out, people obviously come in for help. They want to feel a little better. But if they also started something else new, right? If they're starting a couple of new things at the same time, like, I'm feeling better, but I don't really know if it's this or if it's that thing. And like, ultimately, the goal is that you feel good. Does it really matter? Like, it matters. And I would like to think that what we're doing is helping. That's why you're here. Um, and all of that. But the goal is to feel better. And so, yeah, as a practitioner, if what you're doing is helping your patients, cool. I think part of this is, what if there were, it's the what ifs again. I can't remember where we had that conversation, but what if you can learn something new? Or what if leaning into you doing your own work and um, going on your own journey helps you help your patients more? Not because of anything that you were doing up to this point was wrong, but because it's an and, it's not an or. And the invitation we're given in school is to do your own work. And I wish I remember, we talk about it all the time. And if you know who it was, then we'll say who it is. But one of our teachers was, you can only take your patients as far as you're willing to go within yourself. And that is something that is always, we talk about it a lot. So I know that it stuck for you too. But that is something that always has lived at the heart of practice for me, even when we're settled and maybe a little overconfident in our own personal journeys. Like, it's still there in the back of your mind of, anytime when you start seeing the same things just show up in your treatment room, or the phone's not ringing as much as you would like. It's like, all right, let's do a little check in. Are we doing the things that we need to do to take care of ourselves? And it's not as much about, what do I need to do to fix or for it to be different? I think sometimes the invitation is, can you be honest with yourself about where you're actually at? Are you actually doing the things that, we joked about it recently? I got back from this trip, and the connection and conversations that I've been having with people through text and email, and people calling both for the gym and for the clinic. And I'm like, is that all I needed to do was go hide in the woods for 4 days? And you pointed out that, hey, you're doing your work. And I'm like, thought I was. Like, and that's okay. That's again also not a self-judgment. Like the things that I've been doing for myself have been making a difference. I don't know. I'm also doing different now and I feel different in that. And it's changed my work the last couple of weeks. I feel like have felt like I've been doing good work, but I do feel different in the treatment room the last couple of weeks. And that's an interesting place to be. I'm hearing different things. I'm asking different questions. I'm just a different presence. And so some of the teaching that we're wanting to do is like, how do we help bridge that gap? And what does that even begin to look like in terms of communicating that to people, like you're saying, who are already doing good work? They're running clinics, they're seeing patients, they're getting results. I guess part of the question is what's the goal in that?
Well, I think part of it goes, we've said this before, it goes beyond, look, you can sign up for as many CEUs as you want to, and we can learn as many points and protocols and procedures and all of those things. And they're all valuable. It's all knowledge. We're all collecting those things and those tools. But I think the one tool that we have that we may not get as much attention is ourselves. And I remember sitting in a learning one time with another instructor, and he made the comment in the class that sometimes it takes practitioners 10 years to find their confidence. And I think that's part of the internal work. So I think we pursue a lot of these extra points, procedures, and protocols, these other methods as a way of building confidence in ourselves that we can show up for our patients and we have that thing they need in this next magic thing. I think it's the same way the gadgets and gizmos show up in the treatment room. It's how do we need all of this stuff to be absolutely the answer to a patient's concerns. And then we get through and all these methods and all of this others, all these things. And what if we just were doing our own work and we showed up as ourselves and we sat with the pulses and we assessed the tone and we held space and we were just ourselves, like understanding that we are in itself one of the tools. And how do we do that? And trust, yeah, yeah. Make it down a shirt, I am the tool. And how do we do that in a way that helps us feel confident that what we're doing for the person sitting in front of us is so valuable? I remember sitting in treatments as a student years ago, and part of our process was sitting in as an assist in a treatment room, and your role was to roll moxa and run down the hall when they tell you to, and then hold space. That was really it. And if you don't even interact with the patient unless they ask you to, unless they initiate. So you're in this place. And so you got to observe the primary doing their work in the treatment room. And you got to sign up for these as you wanted to. So I had several patients that I would always sign up with them because I like to hear how things go. Okay, how did it go last week and all of that sort of stuff. I remember a couple circumstances where I was with the same patient, but the practitioner was out of town. So they had a different practitioner sub in. And I had this experience with a couple different patients where like you got used to knowing who they were and what their rhythm was in the treatment room. And then you switch the practitioner and it's the exact same patient. And it was a completely different experience as the assist in that room because you got to watch the interaction be different with the different person. And they were both beautiful treatments, but they got something different out of the new practitioner today that they weren't getting from the other. Not necessarily good or bad, just different. And it was an interesting learning to recognize why the practitioner matters and why, like, we get the people in our treatment rooms we're supposed to get in our treatment rooms and their interactions with us are what they are. But if I treat one of your patients tomorrow, they're going to get a different version of the medicine because I'm a different version of a practitioner and vice versa. So it's interesting to learn that early on to be able to witness that. And the one old guy, he was the practitioner, she wasn't flirty at all, but this guy, you could watch him be a little fiery with her. And the next week, in fact, I treated him the following week. He was a lot less flirty with me than he was with her. And it was good. And we put on I put on different music for him because he was sure I couldn't find music he would like, and he loved it. And he was bragging on the music when she come back the next week and all of the things. But there was just, the interactions were completely different because we're different people. And I think I can't get lost for people that the practitioner matters. And from that, what work are you doing? Are you doing your work? Are you not? What are the things you're avoiding that you bring into the treatment room that you're hiding away because you're trying not to be seen? Or you're trying to protect yourself from taking anything home that's not yours. And I don't know, it's just a fascinating place to be. So as we consider what we teach and what we share, like I think that's the forefront of things more than these points, procedures, and protocols.
Yeah.
But I think it's valuable stuff.
I think it'd be interesting I'm gonna realizing I talk a lot as we record. So I'm gonna kick this back to you. Um, I had somebody ask me the other day, like, what do you mean by doing your own work? I'm like, oh, like, it's just been such a part of our vocabulary for so long that like it's another one of those things that like we understand what that means to us, but realizing that like when we say that to someone, like, do your own work, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. How would you describe that to someone, anyone, practitioner, patient? What does it mean? What do we mean by do your own work?
So I had an experience this weekend I'll share with you. So I signed up for, I talked about it already, the meeting with sit around and we're talking to other practitioners and we were all students of a particular teacher. That's how I found my way there. And it was the first time I'd been there. So I was a new guy in the room. So everybody was curious and we did that. I'm also one of the guys. So I wish there was 20 people in the room. So when I slip into the room, you don't notice me and I can just be there and take it all in. But I walked in the room, there's like 4 of us and I was obviously the new guy. So we had some conversation, introductions, and all those things, which was fun. And then we started talking and the conversation led us to one gentleman in the room asked the question, what do you do for stress relief? This is where I'm going with how do you do your own work? I think doing your own work can be all kinds of things, but I think ultimately it's about making sure that we're sorting through the stuff that allows us to show up for ourselves, that we're staying connected to what's in our hearts and less about what's in our brains. And we're moving our bodies and we're trying to nourish ourselves well. And all of it ultimately leads back to it's our medicine. Everything is in servitude to the heart, and the heart is about joy. So in my response, after they went around the room, at this point, there was 6 or 7 people in the room. Everybody had wonderful ideas ranging from blue light blockers on their, just to kind of keep their EMFs away. And there was Qigong and there was Tai Chi and there was lots of meditation and all these cool ideas on how you manage your stress and how do you keep your stress levels down. And the only word that I could get in my brain around all of it, and I knew they had already demonstrated that they were going to call on me because that's just what they were doing. And I was going to have to share. And the only thing that could come out of my mouth when they're like, how do you manage your stress? And I said, joy. And then they all, their heads tilted, huh? Not that they didn't understand what joy is, but I was like, I don't think you understand the question. And I'm like, so let me elaborate. There's a level of this that we spend so much time in our treatment rooms encouraging our patients to connect with themselves, find their hearts, and making sure, especially in the mental, emotional world and the spiritual realm, when they're trying to decide, reduce their anxiety and reduce their stress and reduce their fears and heal their grief and all of those things, and reminding people that the joy is intended to exist within your heart. And if you're on path and you're walking your path and you're leading the life that you're intended to lead, then there should be joy there. And if we're making choices in our lives that align with joy being there, A versus B, if B leads us down a path, it's going to become joy and A does not, then why are we choosing A? Why aren't we choosing B? Not in a selfish way, not at the expense of anybody else's joy, but are you making choices in your life and choosing things in your life that you think align with who you are and how you want to show up in the world and how you want yourself to be represented in the world? I think if we're choosing joy in those moments and we're choosing what aligns in those moments, then I think the stress falls away. And I followed that up with not that life doesn't get stressful, but in those moments, then I think the way we move out of those spaces and continue to nourish ourselves is to make sure that our decisions that we make in those moments also align with integrity and who we are and how we want to show up in the world. And I think if we do that, most of the things that feel really heavy may not really be as heavy as we think they are. And we can at least find our way back there. And if we can't do anything about it, then what are we worried about it for in the first place? I think that was my answer in this script setting. And I think if we're doing our work, I think that's a big part of our work. I think it happens every day in all the moments, and it doesn't mean we don't slip up, and it doesn't mean we don't have stressful days. But remembering who we are in that place is valuable. So joy is when we think about doing our work. Are you choosing joy? Are you choosing those moments that align with the integrity of who you are and how you really want to be in the world versus how everybody else expects you to be or how society thinks you should be, or mom, dad, spouse, boss, those types of things. But
I think the other end of, I think that's the direction that we're trying to move towards. And the other half of that work is being able to be honest about the things that are not in alignment with that being the goal. And that's current stuff, past stuff, anything in that front that is, we see a lot of people who are working through trauma, right? And sometimes doing the work is still you trying to move yourself towards joy. But that also means you have to be real with yourself about the things that you've gone through, been through, and how you feel about it, right? So it's not even just um the events per se, but being able to acknowledge the anger or the fear or yeah, those types of things. And so I think that's a huge piece of it too, that there's this, how do we bring the past forward so we can leave it behind, but also, yeah, it's all still in servitude of trying to find joy.
also probably should point out that fully recognize that it's a lot easier to say than it is to do.
Yeah.
Depending on where you are in your process and what you've been through. This is not taking for granted the fact that people have been through some heavy stuff. Don't take for granted that the people that have figured it out haven't been through some heavy stuff. But the heavy stuff you don't have to carry it all the time.
You don't have to wear it like a
And
badge.
all of this is to say, it's a lot easier to say than it is to do, but that's why it's a practice. And it doesn't happen overnight. It's not a switch that you flip, and it's not a complete disregard from who we are and where we've been through and how we got where we are. But ultimately, though, I think that is the landscape we're looking at. And there's really only a couple paths towards it. We have to be willing to sort through some of our, it's a no mud, no lotus kind of idea, but it's,
But the level of, yeah, again, coming back to the self honesty in that. Yeah, it's interesting too, because joy is fun because I think most people know that's the goal, right? Like they want to be happy. And I would say there's probably a even bigger conversation we can have around the difference between like joy and happiness, right? They're slightly different from one another. And as much as people are trying to find joy and or happiness, sometimes it's not about wanting to find that as much as it's about like they just don't want to be angry or they don't want to be sad, right? Those are also two different angles, right? To lean into joy versus leaning away from anger. Like people don't want to be angry, they don't want to be sad. And I would say that for the majority of people, what they have found in their lack of anger or lack of grief is contentment. And contentment is not the same thing as joy. That's a whole other thread we can pull. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. But there's one of the questions, and I think it probably comes up in both of our treatment rooms that we ask early on in the intake is what brings you joy? And if you can't name, you're not allowed to name family or pets, right? Because everyone's, my kids bring me joy,
Rocco.
or my spouse, or yeah, Fido. Like, did you say Rocco? And that's not a, I will, we want you to go deeper than that. That's not a, like, and it's always funny because I think most of the time when I present the question, I usually follow it up with the disclaimer of, and you can't say XYZ. And 8 times out of 10, I get a chuckle because it's like, yeah, I already knew you were going to say, and I'm happy for you in your happiness with your family. That's not the case for everyone, right? Not everybody can name that their family is their source of joy in their life. So we don't disregard that. But it's, if you're sitting in a room by yourself and no one else is around, do you experience joy? And most people have a hard time answering that question, or they lean one direction or the other. But yeah, it's a big question that we don't spend enough time asking or really thinking through, right? So we so much count on that external factor to give that to us, right? If I'm with so and or if I'm doing XYZ, those things bring you joy, but it doesn't mean that you're connected to the joy within your heart, because that we should be able to feel when we're sitting in a room by ourselves. Sure.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah. The peacefulness is another. Sometimes that lack of joy when we're sitting in a room by ourselves can be voices in our heads. Those voices aren't coming from your heart. Voices in our heads that make us question who we are, how we are, and whether we're enough or whether we're all those things. One of the analogies I like to use with folks is when we talk about the heart, I usually would describe it as this empty container, this empty vessel. And that our part of our role as we make those decisions is to make sure we're filling it up with those joyful moments, those things that like we're collecting those joys along the way, but also touching on the fears and the grief and some of those other angers that exist there in a way. Like sometimes we have to remove those things from that empty vessel. That's not really empty. How do we remove these things that don't belong there and replace them with things that do belong there as a way of moving through some of that stuff? Kind of almost like unpacking. And it's not fast. It's sometimes we have to takes a little time and we have to make peace with some of those moments. But yeah,
Emotions are a fun one in our world. We'll probably do a much bigger conversation around some of that. The appropriateness, right? I always, whenever I say it to patients, I'm always like appropriate because there's not a roadmap to that either. Um, Not being able to feel anger is just as pathological as being angry all the time. There's places in our lives where you should feel like the injustice, right? The grief, same thing. Like loss is hard. The goal is not to get stuck in any one area. I had a teacher, which I feel bad. I don't remember who any of these people are that told us these things, but the nuggets stuck, right? Like feeling joy, being happy 24/7 is just as pathological as running around being angry at the world. And that sounds really silly. And especially on the other side of a conversation where we're telling you to find joy. But life is so dynamic, right? It's not just this one thing. Things happen. And our ability to move in and out of those spaces and acknowledge it and be real about it. It's not, I was telling a patient the other day, it's not the experience of the emotion that is causing the disruptance, right? Yeah, I keep harping on anger. Anger is one that we see a lot. Like people their digestion gets all weird. And that looks different for everyone. But usually when there's higher stress or emotions that are not being expressed, or they're mad, but they're doing a really good job telling everyone they're not mad, right? Like it starts fighting back, usually internally. And it's not the presence of the anger that is the problem in this situation. It's your lack of willingness to express it and own it and acknowledge that you're a little irritated, that is keeping it suppressed and causing it to beat up on your digestive system. And it's so interesting and that has a lot to do with how people were brought up, right? Like people don't lean into those places because they were there was either a lot of that in the household when they were growing up, or they don't want to lose it, or whatever that may be. But yeah, the emotion stuff is always fun to sort through because the goal is joy, but the goal is also to be able to experience I don't know the word, spectrum of emotions and settle into a place of joy.
We practiced in the South for almost 10 years. That's always my
Anger.
example. That's always my example for anger because most of the women that I treated there that were raised there were brought up to, they weren't allowed to be angry. That's what your heart comes from.
Sure art is
Bless your heart. But I had s- several patients that had they grown up there and the area we were in, you were supposed to, oh boy, they're supposed to obey your husband and obey your preacher. And you weren't entitled to those emotions. And so it was always exciting the first time somebody come in after doing some of this work and they express that they had a rough week because they got mad. And I usually induced a high five, depending on why. We checked in on the appropriateness and stuff. But there was a level of, yeah, that seems like an appropriate place for you to get a little angry. The husbands didn't always appreciate it, but I have a daughter of my own that I want her to be a strong, independent woman who can express herself when she needs to express herself. But there's a piece of that's very important. And too much and too little are both pathological. So fire is red. So we get into thinking about the appropriateness of emotions. And the idea, I always like use fire as an example. Fire is red, fire is joy, heart. I'm a big fan of campfire, right? They're nice, they're cozy, they're all kinds of things, different types of fires, appropriate different people. But there's a level of a forest fire is not appropriate. Like it's too much fire. It's a nice way to think about some of the emotions.
being in a place where, so yes, fire season is a thing out here, but they also do controlled burns, right? Controlled big burns to help reset things.
I do usually say out of control fire when I talk about it. I don't even know what track we were on now.
I don't either.
Oh,
Well, and
things I love about our clinic and since we've been here is the community that we built and the characters within that community that have found their way in. But also, I think it's neat too that if they've been around here probably longer than we have, for sure. And it's neat to the couple that we see on a regular basis for them to feel good enough with us and trusting enough of us to feel like it's a safe space to come in and just check in. And we just had one pop in. That's why it feels like we kind of lost track with what we were talking about. A little clunky, but he's wonderful though. He's also someone will come in and get fired up, but he's also, and when he needs things, he knows that he can show up here and we'll take care of him and give him advice and help him out with what he's looking for because it's kind of how we show up in the world. So
as much as we've adopted him, I also think he takes ownership of us. Like,
probably,
it's funny when we were in school, right? Like we had inherited patients and like files that got passed down. And these patients had been part of the clinic for sometimes just the previous class, but there were those staples that had been around for 2, 3, 4, 8 years. And so there was always, as much as they had turnover of a practitioner every year, they took a lot of pride in training us to be acupuncturists. I think about that with a couple of our community people that just pop up and come in and are around. So as much as like we adopt him and take him in, he's one that it feels like he's just, yeah, he takes ownership of us just as much as we take him in. So it's cool. I think because it had been so long since we've recorded specifically for this podcast, it was nice to just kind of catch up and see where we're at. Um, and yeah, the invitation to people watching this too is if there's things that you want to know or want to hear us talk about, it may not necessarily come up on the next episode, but whatever questions are out there, it is helpful and it's interesting. We recently have been talking about, I think, underestimate what information we have in our brains just share and what we have the ability to talk about. And even as we got like halfway through this conversation today, I'm realizing like it's another one that got heavy fast. But that was also like our original intention for recording was sitting down. These are conversations that we're having without the cameras on. Or Thursday, we go get coffee every Thursday before we come into the office, and our Thursday conversations turn into this too. So it really has very little to do with the cameras being on, and more of just how we choose to spend our time,
Depth of
the
discussion.
conversations that we choose to have, and they just go to different places. And the feedback that we get from others or questions we get from others give us an opportunity to like, I don't know, and maybe we have thought about it, but it's also fun. We take a lot of pride in, and I'll say we in this, of being in the treatment room with our patients and asking those questions that like we're trying to find the one that you don't necessarily have an off the cuff answer for, right? That's part of the fun and exploring and helping people dive into their own work. And so yeah, throw some questions out there. I think it would be fun to sit down and for us to have some conversation around them, but also contemplate them and see where it goes. And it can also be what is green attached to. We said fire is red like 3 times today, but if there's practitioners watching and there's clinical questions or those types of things, this is space for that as well. And we'll get back to a little more regular recording schedule. So yeah, got anything else to add?
I like the format of just this coming up and trying to find something I won't always use the word scripted because they're never scripted. Just see where it goes is always fun. Less planning. That's probably the fire CF in me is the,
It makes the wood person in me crazy.
but
But,
no, that's good.
well, it's some of that too is, uh, bringing that full circle is the lack of gadgets, gizmos, and protocols, right? Like, we're not really sitting down and being like, "You know what we should teach them today? Blank," right? This is always just intended to be a platform for us to get together and see where the conversation goes, and that's what we're doing. So, here we are.
Sounds good.
Okay.